You expect me to shake his hand? Richard Whitmore didn't whisper it. His voice carried across the crystal-lit ballroom, slicing through the soft jazz and polished conversation surrounding him. Malcolm Hayes stood 3 feet away, his right hand extended. For one long second, nobody moved. Richard's eyes dropped to Malcolm's hand, then traveled slowly upward. Black tuxedo. No designer label flashing from the cuff. No entourage. No assistant hovering nearby. Just a composed black man standing among some of Manhattan's wealthiest executives, as if he belonged there. Richard gave a thin smile. Then he turned away. Senator Wallace. His expression brightened instantly as he reached past Malcolm to shake the hand of a white man approaching from behind. Wonderful to see you. A few nervous laughs escaped nearby. Malcolm lowered his hand. Slowly. Across the ballroom, 29-year-old communications manager Emily Carter stopped mid-step. The folder she carried tightened against her chest. She recognized Malcolm. Richard clearly didn't. And before she could move, Richard glanced back. This is an executive gala, he said. Guests should know their place. The words landed harder than the rejected handshake. Malcolm studied him without anger. Around them, champagne glasses hovered near silent mouths. A waiter suddenly found the floor fascinating. 2 board members exchanged uncomfortable looks. But Malcolm remained still. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malcolm. Richard seemed to mistake Malcolm's silence for embarrassment. That was his first mistake. Malcolm adjusted one cuff and glanced toward the enormous Aurelius Dynamics emblem glowing above the stage. In less than an hour, someone important was scheduled to stand beneath that logo. Someone Richard had spent the entire evening talking about without realizing how close that person already was. Malcolm looked back at him. I think before tonight ends, he said quietly, we'll both know exactly where we belong. Richard's smile faded for half a second. Then arrogance returned. He turned toward a member of the event staff. Who invited him? Emily heard it. Her face tightened. Malcolm heard it too, but something else caught his attention. A white guest had just arrived without showing an invitation at all. The hostess smiled and waved him straight inside. Malcolm watched, not angry, observing. Because 15 minutes earlier, when he had entered this ballroom alone, he hadn't come looking for a confrontation. He had come looking for an answer. And Richard Whitmore was beginning to give him one. Malcolm let his eyes follow the white guest through the ballroom. No badge check. No suspicious glance. No quiet request to prove he belonged. Just a smile. Good evening, Mr. Prescott. The difference was almost elegant in its simplicity. Malcolm said nothing. That was why he had come alone. Earlier that evening, his driver had offered to walk him inside. His executive assistant had suggested having corporate security nearby. Malcolm declined both. No entourage. No announcement. No visible shield of importance. He wanted to see the company when nobody thought the owner was watching. Near the stage, Richard lifted a champagne glass while speaking to 3 investors. What we've built here, Richard said, is more than a company. It's a culture. My vision has always been about excellence. My vision. Malcolm's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He remembered the first Aurelius office 17 years earlier. 2 rented rooms above a printing shop in Baltimore, second-hand desks, unpaid invoices stacked beside a coffee machine that leaked onto the floor. Back then, there had been no gala, no chandeliers, no executives competing to stand closest to the CEO. There had only been an idea, 6 employees, and Malcolm working until sunrise because failure meant 6 families losing a paycheck. Now Richard spoke about that history as though he had built it with his own hands. Emily approached cautiously. Mr. Hayes. Malcolm turned. She lowered her voice. I'm sorry about what just happened. Don't apologize for something you didn't do. Her eyes moved toward Richard. I should probably tell him. Malcolm studied her for a moment. No, Emily blinked. No, not yet. Something in his tone made her understand this was no longer an awkward social encounter. It was information. Malcolm glanced toward the stage, where a sealed presentation folder rested beside the podium. Inside was the announcement he had intended to make tonight, one concerning the next chapter of Aurelius and the leadership entrusted to carry it there. For months, complaints had reached the board in careful language. Exclusive culture, unequal access, favoritism, people made to feel invisible. Richard had dismissed most of them as personality conflicts. Malcolm had wanted evidence before making judgment. Now evidence was walking toward him. Richard crossed the ballroom with the event director at his side. His smile had disappeared. He stopped several feet from Malcolm. "We checked the VIP list." Malcolm slipped one hand into his pocket. "And?" Richard's gaze hardened. "Your name may be on it. That doesn't explain why you're here." Emily inhaled sharply. Malcolm looked at Richard, then at the guests, beginning to notice them again. Richard leaned closer. "So I'll ask you once." His voice dropped. "Who exactly are you supposed to be?" Malcolm held Richard's stare. "Someone whose name is on your VIP list." Richard's mouth tightened. "That isn't what I asked." "No," Malcolm said. "It's what you verified." Emily shifted beside them. Richard noticed. "You can go, Emily." She hesitated. "I said go." Malcolm caught the fear in her face before she stepped away. Not fear of Richard physically. Something quieter. More familiar. The fear of losing a career because the wrong powerful man decided you had become inconvenient. Richard turned back. "People paid thousands to attend tonight. Board members. Investors. Partners. I have a responsibility to protect the room." "From what?" Richard paused. Malcolm waited. That silence forced Richard to hear the implication of his own words. The event director, Claire Benson, hurried over with a tablet. "Mr. Whitmore, his invitation is valid. Executive access." Richard snatched the tablet from her. Malcolm's name glowed plainly on the screen. "Malcolm Hayes, Executive VIP." Richard stared at it. For a second, Malcolm thought facts might win. Then Richard handed it back. "VIP doesn't mean executive." Claire frowned. "It literally says executive access." Richard's eyes flashed. "I know what it says." A few feet away, another guest approached the velvet partition. White. Mid-50s. No visible badge. Security immediately lifted the rope. "Mr. Landon, welcome." Malcolm watched him pass. Richard saw Malcolm watching. "That's different." Malcolm turned slowly. "How?" Richard gave a humorless laugh. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Turn this into something it isn't." Now several guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Malcolm could feel the room changing. Richard stepped closer. "You walk into a private corporate event alone. Nobody knows you. And suddenly, I'm the bad guy for asking questions." "You didn't ask him any." Malcolm nodded toward Landon. Richard's face hardened. "He's known here. And I'm not." "Exactly." There it was. Not proof. Not policy. Recognition. Richard pointed toward Malcolm's jacket. "Where's your credential?" Malcolm reached inside and produced the embossed invitation. Richard barely examined it. "These can be transferred. Check the registration." "We already did." "And?" Richard ignored the question. Instead, he signaled toward a security supervisor near the ballroom entrance. That movement changed everything. Emily saw it from across the room. She immediately started back toward them. "Richard, wait." He spun around. "Stay out of this." Emily stopped, but this time she didn't retreat. Her hands trembled at her sides. "I can't." Richard stared at her. Emily swallowed, looked at Malcolm, then at the security supervisor approaching. "I know who he is." Richard gave a cold smile. "Then enlighten us." Emily opened her mouth. Malcolm raised one hand. "Emily." She froze. He could end this now. One sentence would do it. Instead, Malcolm looked toward the approaching security officer, then back at Richard. "No," he said quietly. "Let him make his choice." Richard's smile returned. And Emily suddenly understood Malcolm wasn't waiting to be rescued. He was watching to see how far Richard would go. "Then let him speak for himself," Richard said. Emily's face tightened. Malcolm gave her a small nod. Not permission to surrender, but permission to wait. The security supervisor arrived beside Richard. His nameplate read Daniel Reeves. "Problem, sir." Richard gestured toward Malcolm without looking at him. "His invitation checks out, but I want his access reviewed before he gets anywhere near the executive tables." Daniel frowned. "If registration cleared him, I'm the CEO." 3 words. Richard used them like a weapon. Daniel's posture changed. Malcolm noticed. So did Emily. "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said carefully, "would you come with me while we verify your credentials?" Malcolm didn't move. "Verify what?" "Your authorization to be in this section." Claire already verified it. Daniel glanced toward Richard. That glance answered everything. Across the ballroom, Emily pulled out her phone. She opened the internal event system and searched Malcolm's registration herself. His profile appeared immediately. Executive VIP. Board authorization. A second line made her breath catch. Special introduction, 9:15 p.m. She looked toward the stage, then back at Malcolm. Richard still had no idea. Emily started forward again, but another detail on the screen stopped her. Malcolm's profile had just been flagged. Access review requested. Requested by R. Whitmore. Richard had created suspicion after the system had already cleared Malcolm. Richard, Emily said louder now. Several conversations nearby died. You flagged his profile after Claire confirmed him. Richard turned sharply. You're discussing internal security information in front of a guest? I'm saying the system cleared him, and I overruled it. Why? Richard stared at her. Emily's voice shook, but she didn't lower it. What changed between seeing his clearance and deciding it wasn't enough? A board member nearby slowly lowered his champagne glass. Richard's face reddened. Go back to your station. Emily remained where she was. Malcolm watched her carefully. This was costing her something now. Richard stepped closer. That wasn't a suggestion. Emily swallowed. For a moment, she looked ready to retreat. Then she locked her phone and slipped it into her pocket. No, the word was barely above a whisper. But Richard heard it. So did I, another voice said. Claire had stepped beside Emily. I saw the registration. Mr. Hayes was cleared before the gala opened. Richard looked between them, suddenly aware that his authority was no longer controlling the room. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Sir, if 2 staff members confirmed his access, I don't have grounds to remove him. Richard's jaw clenched. Malcolm could have ended it there. Instead, he asked one question. If I looked different, would we still be having this conversation? Richard's eyes went cold, and whatever restraint remained in him disappeared. Fine. He pointed toward Malcolm. Forget the invitation. Then he looked directly at Daniel. Escort him away from the executive floor. A silence fell over the group. Emily stared at Richard in disbelief. Daniel didn't move. Richard raised his voice. Now, and for the first time that evening, a hand reached toward Malcolm. Daniel's hand stopped inches from Malcolm's arm. Sir, he said quietly, I need you to come with me. Malcolm looked at the hand, then at Daniel. Are you asking me to leave? Daniel hesitated. Richard answered for him. You're being removed. The words pulled something old from Malcolm's memory. Not this ballroom. Not these chandeliers. A smaller room. 20 years earlier. Cheap carpet. Fluorescent lights. A conference table where 26-year-old Malcolm had spent 40 minutes pitching the software platform that would eventually become the foundation of Aurelius Dynamics. When the meeting ended, he had approached the senior banker who controlled the investment fund. Malcolm had extended his hand. The banker looked at it. Never took it. People like you don't walk into rooms like this without someone opening the door. Malcolm had carried that sentence for 2 decades. Not as a wound. As fuel. He had built the door. Then the building around it. Now, beneath the 30-foot Aurelius logo, another man was deciding whether Malcolm deserved to stand inside what he had created. Daniel finally touched his sleeve. Malcolm stepped back once. Don't. The word wasn't loud. Daniel immediately removed his hand. Richard scoffed. Now he's refusing security. No, Emily said. He's refusing to be treated like a criminal. Richard turned on her. And you're finished discussing this. Emily's face went pale, but Claire moved closer to her. Then something unexpected happened. An older board member, Thomas Bennett, approached from the executive tables. What's going on? Richard's posture changed instantly. Nothing serious. Credential issue. Thomas looked at Malcolm. His expression shifted. Recognition almost surfaced. Wait. Malcolm held his gaze. Thomas stopped. Malcolm gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. Richard missed it. We're handling an unauthorized guest, he continued. Apparently someone got him executive access without proper verification. Thomas stared at Richard. Without verification? Exactly. Emily unlocked her phone. No, that's not what happened. She opened Malcolm's event record and held it toward Thomas. He was verified before doors opened. Richard added the security flag afterward. Thomas read the screen. His expression hardened. Richard's confidence flickered. That's standard discretion. It isn't, Claire said. Then Emily scrolled lower. She froze. What? Malcolm asked. Emily didn't answer. She opened another internal tab connected to the access review system. 3 names appeared, all flagged during previous Aurelius events. All originally cleared. Emily tapped the first record, then the second, then the third. Her breathing changed. Emily, Claire whispered. She looked up at Malcolm. This wasn't the first time. Richard stepped forward. Give me that phone. Emily backed away. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. What did you find? She swallowed. 3 previous executive guests were manually flagged after verification. Thomas moved beside her. His face darkened as he read the names. 2 were black. 1 was Latino. Each complaint had been closed under the same notation. Access concern. Management discretion. Richard reached for the phone. Emily pulled it against her chest. Malcolm no longer looked at Richard with restrained irritation. This was different. He had entered the gala wondering whether the complaints about Aurelius' culture reflected poor management. Now he was staring at evidence that someone may have turned bias into procedure. Richard's voice sharpened. You're misreading internal records. Malcolm faced him. Then explain them. Richard said nothing. Thomas looked toward Malcolm, realization settling across his face. We need to stop the program. Malcolm glanced toward the stage. The sealed presentation folder was still beside the podium. His original announcement suddenly felt irrelevant. No, Malcolm said. Richard blinked. No. Malcolm's eyes stayed on him. Keep the program exactly as scheduled. Then he turned to Emily. Save those records. Richard's face changed. For the first time, there was fear behind the arrogance. Malcolm saw it, and that told him something even the records hadn't. Richard wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. He was afraid of what they might find next. Save everything, Malcolm said. Emily's fingers tightened around her phone. Richard stepped toward her. Those are internal records. You are not authorized to copy them. Thomas moved between them. She's preserving evidence. She's violating company policy. Malcolm watched Richard carefully. There it was again. Policy. A clean word people reached for when they wanted something ugly to sound official. Emily looked at Malcolm. If I export these records, compliance will log my employee ID. Richard gave a thin smile. Exactly. The threat worked. For a moment, Emily stared at the screen. She had spent 6 years building her career at Aurelius. Malcolm could see the calculation in her face. Salary, reputation, references, everything that could disappear because she had refused to look away. You don't have to do it, Malcolm said. Emily looked up. Richard almost laughed. Finally, some common sense. Malcolm ignored him. If you preserve those records, do it because you believe they matter, not because I told you to. Emily glanced toward the executive tables. People she worked for were watching now. People who could decide whether she still had a desk Monday morning. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she pressed export. A confirmation appeared. Audit copy created. Richard's expression hardened. You just ended your career. Emily swallowed. Maybe. Her voice shook. But at least I'll know why. Malcolm said nothing, but the words struck deeper than she knew. Years ago, he had promised himself Aurelius would never become the kind of institution where doing the right thing required professional suicide. Yet Emily had just risked everything simply to preserve the truth. That failure belonged to leadership, and leadership, ultimately, belonged to him. Thomas leaned closer to the phone. There's more. Emily opened the archive complaint log linked to the flagged profiles. One complaint had been submitted 11 months earlier by Dr. Andre Collins, a black biotech founder invited to an Aurelius investor dinner. His note was short, cleared at registration, repeatedly questioned by management, asked to prove invitation after other guests entered freely. Disposition, no action, CEO office reviewed. Malcolm's eyes stopped on those words. CEO office? Emily nodded. Richard answered too quickly. I don't personally review every complaint. Thomas looked at him. But your office closed it. My staff handles hundreds of issues. Emily opened another. Same disposition. Then another. Same. Malcolm felt the conflict shift inside him. Tonight was supposed to be about stability. Investors were waiting for confidence. Employees were waiting for direction. The board had spent months preparing an expansion announcement that could affect thousands of jobs. Exposing a leadership crisis on stage could damage all of it. Richard knew that. You want to turn a gala into an investigation? He asked quietly. Think about what that does to Aurelius. Malcolm looked toward the company logo. That was the choice. Protect the image. Or protect what the image was supposed to mean. Richard lowered his voice. Whatever you think happened here, handle it privately tomorrow. Malcolm turned back. That's how those complaints disappeared, isn't it? Richard's face tightened. Across the room, the lights dimmed once. A 5-minute warning. The program was about to begin. Thomas stepped beside Malcolm. We can postpone your introduction. Malcolm looked at Emily, then at the exported records, then toward Daniel, who had nearly removed him because Richard ordered it. No. He took out his phone and typed one message to Margaret Sullivan, chairwoman of the board. Proceed with the introduction. Do not change a word. He pressed send. Seconds later, Margaret looked down at her phone from beside the stage. Then she looked across the ballroom directly at Malcolm. She understood. Richard didn't. The orchestra faded. Guests began moving toward their tables. And as Margaret walked toward the microphone, Richard straightened his jacket and smiled, apparently believing the next introduction belonged to him. Ladies and gentlemen. Margaret Sullivan's voice settled over the ballroom. Conversation dissolved. Chairs turned toward the stage. The enormous Aurelius emblem glowed behind her in silver and blue. Richard adjusted his jacket. Then he moved closer to the stage. Malcolm stayed exactly where he was, near the rear of the ballroom, beside Emily, beside the security supervisor who had nearly escorted him out. Margaret smiled toward the audience. Tonight was intended to celebrate the next chapter of Aurelius Dynamics. Applause rose. Richard smiled broadly. He gave a small nod to an investor at the front table, already carrying himself like the man everyone had gathered to honor. Margaret continued, "But before we discuss where this company is going, we should remember where it came from." Richard's smile weakened. 17 years ago, Aurelius began with 6 employees, 2 rented rooms in Baltimore, and an idea most investors refused to take seriously. Malcolm's eyes lifted. 2 rented rooms, second-hand desks, a leaking coffee machine. The details he carried privately were now filling the ballroom. Richard slowly turned his head. Margaret continued, "The man who built those first systems worked nights because 6 families depended on him getting the company through another month." Emily looked at Malcolm. Richard did too. This time he really looked. Not at the tuxedo, not at the lack of entourage. At his face. Something broke behind Richard's eyes. "No," he whispered. Margaret's voice grew warmer. He later stepped away from daily operations, choosing to let professional leadership run the company while he remained its founder and majority owner. Daniel took one slow step backward. Claire covered her mouth. Thomas said nothing. He had known. Richard finally understood why. Margaret looked directly toward the back of the room. "Please welcome the founder and majority owner of Aurelius Dynamics." The spotlight moved. Across tables. Past investors. Past board members. Until it stopped on the black man Richard had refused to touch. Mr. Malcolm Hayes. Silence. Pure, stunned silence. Then the ballroom erupted. Applause rolled across the room as people stood. Richard didn't. He looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. Malcolm walked forward. Every step carried a memory. Who invited him? VIP doesn't mean executive. Guests should know their place. Daniel moved aside before Malcolm reached him. Emily's eyes were wet, but Malcolm only gave her a quiet nod as he passed. Richard stood near the stairs to the stage. There was nowhere left to hide. "Malcolm!" His voice sounded nothing like it had 20 minutes earlier. Malcolm stopped in front of him. Richard instinctively extended his hand, the same hand that had remained at his side when Malcolm offered his own. Malcolm looked down at it. The entire room seemed to notice. For 1 second, the rejected handshake returned to where it had begun. But Malcolm didn't take Richard's hand. He stepped past him. Margaret met Malcolm at the top of the stairs. Malcolm extended his hand to her. She took it immediately, firmly, without hesitation. The applause grew louder. Richard slowly lowered his empty hand. Malcolm approached the microphone. "Thank you, Margaret." Then he turned toward the ballroom. His gaze eventually found Richard. "I imagine," Malcolm said, "some people in this room are surprised." A nervous silence replaced the applause. Richard started toward him. "Malcolm, please. I had no idea who you were." Malcolm's expression didn't change. "That," he said, "is precisely the problem." Richard stopped. "If my title is what would have earned me your respect, then you've misunderstood what leadership means." No one moved. Malcolm glanced toward Emily. She still had the exported audit records. Then toward Thomas. Then Daniel. The clues had become evidence. The humiliation had become a test Richard never knew he was taking. Malcolm turned back to the microphone. "And before we make tonight's planned announcement, there is another matter this company must address." Richard went pale. Malcolm looked toward Emily. "Ms. Carter." She straightened. "Bring me the records." Richard stepped forward. "Malcolm, don't do this here." Malcolm met his eyes. You were comfortable doing it here when you thought I was nobody. Emily began walking toward the stage. And with every step she took, Richard watched the evidence of his own decisions move closer to the microphone. Emily reached the stage and placed her phone beside the microphone. Richard moved quickly. This is inappropriate. Malcolm turned toward him. What part? You're presenting incomplete internal records to investors without context. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Then provide the context. Richard stopped. The ballroom waited. Malcolm looked at Emily. Show Mr. Bennett what you found. Emily handed the phone to Thomas. His eyes moved across the exported audit copy. 3 executive guests, Thomas said. All cleared before arrival. All manually flagged afterward. Richard shook his head. Security reviews happen all the time. Thomas looked up. 2 black guests. 1 Latino guest. Murmurs spread through the room. Richard's voice sharpened. That proves nothing. Malcolm stepped away from the podium. You're right. Richard blinked. 1 record proves little, Malcolm continued. A pattern demands more. He looked toward Emily. The complaints. She opened them. Thomas read the first. Dr. Andre Collins. Cleared at registration. Repeatedly challenged after entry. He scrolled. Complaint closed. No action. CEO office reviewed. Richard's face tightened. Someone on my staff handled that. Thomas opened the second. Same disposition. Then the third. Same. Malcolm watched Richard carefully. You told me tonight was about protecting the room. Richard spread his hands. It is. You ignored verified credentials. I exercised discretion. You flagged my profile after your own staff cleared me. I didn't know who you were. A silence dropped so suddenly that Richard seemed to hear his own mistake. Malcolm stepped closer. Exactly. Richard swallowed. Malcolm's voice remained calm. You keep defending yourself with the same confession. Richard looked around at the executives who had once leaned toward every word he spoke. Now no one moved toward him. You think this is racism because I didn't recognize you? No. Malcolm pointed toward Emily's phone. I think leadership failed because complaints reached your office and disappeared. Then he pointed toward Claire. Your staff verified me. You overruled them. His gaze moved to Daniel. Security had no grounds to remove me. You ordered it anyway. Finally, Malcolm looked directly at Richard. And when Emily questioned you, you threatened her career. Emily's eyes lowered for a moment. Richard's composure cracked. You're going to destroy this company over one uncomfortable evening. Malcolm stared at him. No, I'm protecting it from the kind of leadership that calls humiliation uncomfortable. Thomas stepped beside Margaret. As a board member, I'm requesting an immediate emergency session. Margaret nodded. Richard went still. Malcolm had the authority to demand Richard's resignation as majority owner. He could have turned the moment into revenge. Instead, he looked at the board members seated across the ballroom. Follow the governance process. Richard's expression briefly changed, almost hopeful. Then Malcolm continued. But until that process is complete, Richard Whitmore cannot remain in operational control while records from his office are under review. Margaret exchanged a glance with Thomas. The directors gathered near the stage. Richard waited alone. Minutes earlier, he had controlled who belonged in the room. Now the room was deciding whether he still belonged at the head of the company. The vote was brief. Margaret returned to the microphone. Effective immediately, Richard Whitmore is suspended from all CEO authority, pending an independent investigation into the complaints and access decisions presented tonight. Richard's face emptied. No. He looked at Malcolm. You planned this. Malcolm shook his head. I planned an announcement. He glanced toward the sealed folder still waiting beside the podium. You made tonight about something else. Richard looked toward Emily. Then Claire. Then Daniel. Nobody came to rescue him. His eyes returned to Malcolm. I made a mistake. Malcolm's voice dropped. A mistake is forgetting someone's name. He glanced at the phone containing the preserved records. This became a pattern when people told you what was happening and you chose not to listen. Richard stood motionless. Then Daniel approached, not to remove Malcolm this time. He stopped beside Richard. Mr. Whitmore. Richard looked at him. Daniel gestured quietly toward the ballroom doors. For several seconds, Richard refused to move. Then he walked. No applause followed. No cheering. Only the sound of his footsteps crossing the same floor where he had asked who invited Malcolm. At the doors, Richard glanced back once. Malcolm was already turning away. Not toward the man who had rejected his hand. Toward the employees who had finally raised theirs. Emily stood beneath the stage lights, uncertain what came next. Malcolm looked at her, then at the hundreds of people waiting for him to speak. The CEO had lost his authority. The evidence would be investigated. But Malcolm knew removing one man could not repair a culture that had taught good people to fear telling the truth. He returned to the microphone. Tonight cannot end with a suspension. The room became silent again. It has to end with a standard. It has to end with a standard. Malcolm let the words settle. No applause followed immediately. That was exactly what he wanted. He looked across the ballroom at employees, investors, board members, and guests who had watched a simple handshake become something much larger. Then his eyes found Emily. "Ms. Carter, come up here." Emily hesitated. Only an hour earlier, she had been carrying folders and checking schedules, careful not to attract the attention of executives who could change her career with a sentence. Now hundreds of eyes followed her toward the stage. She stopped beside Malcolm. "You thought preserving those records might cost you your job," he said. Emily glanced toward the ballroom doors where Richard had disappeared. "Yes, it won't." Her shoulders loosened. "But what happened tonight tells me something worse." Malcolm turned toward the audience. "It tells me an employee believed telling the truth required risking her career." Margaret lowered her eyes. Thomas folded his arms, listening. "That changes tonight." Malcolm announced that the archived complaints would be transferred to an independent review team. Employees involved in those complaints would be protected from retaliation, and executive access decisions would no longer disappear behind vague phrases like management discretion. No dramatic promises. No mass firing. Just accountability with names, records, and consequences. Daniel approached the stage after the program resumed. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm turned. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I should have questioned the order sooner." Malcolm studied him. "You did question it." "Not soon enough." Malcolm nodded once. "Remember that feeling." Daniel understood. Across the room, Claire was speaking quietly with Emily. For the first time all evening, Emily smiled. Then Malcolm noticed the sealed presentation folder beside the podium. The announcement he had originally come to make. He picked it up. For a moment, he considered continuing as planned. Then he closed it again. "Tomorrow," he told Margaret. She nodded. Some decisions could wait. This one couldn't. As the gala began to empty, the chandeliers softened above abandoned champagne glasses and half-cleared tables. The giant Aurelius logo still illuminated the wall, but Malcolm no longer looked at it with pride alone. Building a company had taken 17 years. Protecting what it was supposed to stand for would take every day after. Near the ballroom entrance, Emily waited. "Mr. Hayes?" Malcolm walked toward her. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me stay quiet." Malcolm shook his head. "I didn't make your choice for you." Emily considered that, then nodded. Malcolm started toward the doors before stopping. He remembered Richard's voice. "You expect me to shake his hand?" He remembered another room 20 years earlier. People like you don't walk into rooms like this without someone opening the door. 2 rooms. 2 men. 2 hands left hanging. Malcolm turned back toward Emily. Then he extended his hand. She looked at it for only a second before taking it firmly. No hesitation. No calculation. Just respect. Around them, staff continued clearing the ballroom. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. Emily released his hand. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." "Good night, Emily." Malcolm walked toward the exit. At the doorway, he glanced once at the room Richard had tried to remove him from. Richard had believed the greatest mistake of the evening was failing to recognize the company's owner. It wasn't. Malcolm would have deserved that handshake if he had owned nothing at all. And this time, the hand had been met.